The danger of outgrowing everyone around you. The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance. Alan Watts. Today on Spiritual Wisdom, we're exploring a powerful truth many people secretly face. The moment you start growing faster than the world around you, this experience can feel lonely, confusing, and even painful. Yet it is often the clearest sign that you're stepping into a higher version of yourself. As you listen, I invite you to reflect on your own journey. Have you ever felt yourself outgrowing relationships, environments, or even old versions of who you used to be? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Let's dive in and discover how to turn this uncomfortable transition into a path toward deeper happiness and true personal freedom. 1. Spiritual growth often leads to isolation. Spiritual growth often leads to isolation because as you awaken, you begin to perceive life differently from those around you. And this shift quietly separates you from the familiar world you once belonged to. At first, the changes feel subtle. You notice that certain conversations drain you, certain environments feel too loud or too shallow, and certain relationships that once felt comforting now feel heavy on your spirit. This happens because spiritual awakening is not simply a change in mindset, it is a change in inner frequency. When your awareness expands, your sensitivity sharpens, your intuition strengthens, and you begin to crave depth, authenticity, and emotional truth in ways you never did before. This new way of seeing makes the old world feel strangely distant, and even when you try to stay the same, your soul gently refuses to shrink back to who you were. Like a butterfly among caterpillars, your transformation becomes obvious even if you say nothing, because your energy, values, and worldview no longer align with the people who have not yet begun their own inner evolution. As your spirituality deepens, you naturally drift away from those who still operate from fear, habit, or autopilot living. And this drifting is not rejection. It is energetic misalignment. People who once understood you may now misunderstand you, because while you are seeking meaning, they are seeking comfort. While you are expanding, they are repeating old patterns. While you are breaking cycles, they are holding tightly to them. This mismatch creates a quiet emotional distance that cannot be bridged by pretending. You may try to blend in again, to laugh at the same jokes, to participate in the same routines, but something inside you resists because once consciousness opens, it cannot be closed. This is why outgrowing people feels painful. It is not the loss of them, but the loss of the version of you that used to belong there. Yet this discomfort is also proof that your spiritual awakening is real, because growth always requires leaving something behind, including identities, beliefs, and relationships that cannot travel with you into higher awareness. The danger of outgrowing everyone around you lies in the temptation to shrink yourself just to stay connected, to suppress your truth to avoid conflict, or to dim your inner light so others feel comfortable. But doing this disconnects you from your own soul. Your awakening asks you to trust the path, even when it feels lonely, because solitude is not emptiness, it is alignment. In solitude, you hear your intuition more clearly. You notice what nourishes you and what drains you. You learn to choose peace over approval. And as you continue on this path, you eventually discover that the universe always replaces what no longer aligns with something more authentic. New people appear who understand your depth, honor your boundaries, and resonate with the frequency you are growing into. Growth requires shedding, and shedding creates space for a new spiritual chapter. In this way, isolation is not a punishment, but a passage, the natural transition that happens when you move from who you were to who you are becoming. Your only task is to honor the truth within you and allow the old world to fall away without guilt, trusting that your transformation is leading you to the people, experiences, and alignment that match the person your soul has chosen to become. 2. Growth requires leaving the comfort zone. Growth always demands that you leave the comfort zone, because just as a lobster must shed its shell to grow, you must also be willing to shed the layers of identity, beliefs, and expectations that once protected you, but can no longer hold who you are becoming. And this shedding often feels frightening, vulnerable, and deeply unfamiliar. Yet you can feel it in your body and spirit when expansion is calling you. You may try to hold on to what you know, old habits, old friendships, old emotional patterns. But the moment your inner self begins to stretch, those structures start to feel tight, restrictive, and even painful, reminding you that in spirituality and spiritual development, transformation never happens inside familiarity. It happens in the courageous space where you choose growth over comfort. As you step into this space, you may notice the first signs of change in small yet powerful ways. Conversations that once energized you now feel empty. Activities that once defined you no longer express who you are. And relationships that once felt aligned now feel like they belong to a version of you that no longer exists. This moment of realization can feel destabilizing, as though you're being asked to walk away from everything that shaped you. But what is really happening is that your soul is guiding you beyond what is outdated, so that it can reveal what is authentic, calling you into deeper truth, whether or not the people around you understand it. And as you continue to grow, the danger of outgrowing everyone around you becomes more visible, not because you have elevated yourself above others, but because you have shifted into a different rhythm, a different level of awareness, a different layer of spiritual sensitivity that not everyone in your environment resonates with. You may worry that others will interpret your growth as arrogance or distance. Yet what is actually happening is a natural divergence between those who are committed to evolving and those who prefer to remain in what feels safe. This divergence can bring moments of loneliness, especially when you start seeing things more clearly, responding more consciously, and choosing what nourishes your soul rather than what maintains familiarity. But loneliness is not a punishment. It is a transition period, the tender space between shedding the old shell and growing the new one, the space where your inner voice becomes louder because there are fewer external voices drowning it out, allowing spiritual development to deepen in ways you could not access while clinging to old roles. You may not feel ready for this shedding, and that is okay. No one ever feels fully ready to outgrow their life, but you are ready enough, and your readiness is shown in the simple truth that staying where you are hurts more than stepping into what is next. So as you move through this process, you will feel moments of grief, moments of liberation, moments of confusion, and moments of clarity, all weaving together into the quiet awakening that tells you that your inner world is evolving faster than your external world can keep up. And even though this evolution may separate you from the familiar, it is leading you toward relationships that match your frequency, environments that honor your growth, and a life that reflects who you truly are. The message you must carry forward is this: your expansion will not always be comfortable, and it will not always be understood, but it will always be necessary, because you were never meant to remain inside a shell that was only built for the earlier stages of your becoming. Comment below: I choose growth over comfort, if you're ready to rise beyond your old limits and step boldly into your higher self. 3. Outgrowing others is not superiority. Outgrowing others is never about being superior. It is about quietly realizing that your inner world is expanding in ways that no longer fit the patterns, expectations, and illusions you once lived inside. And this shift becomes clearer the moment you begin to see how much of your old life was shaped by unconscious conditioning, social pressure, and the need to belong. As Alan Watts said, you are under no obligation to remain the same person you were a moment ago. A truth that reminds you that real transformation is not meant to be glamorous or loud. It is meant to be honest. When you evolve, you do not rise above people. You rise above outdated versions of yourself. And this rise naturally creates distance, not because you are better, but because you are no longer willing to shrink to maintain the comfort of others. Yet this is where the danger quietly appears. When your growth outpaces your surroundings, the mind can slip into the very trap you are trying to escape: spiritual ego. It whispers that you are more awakened, more conscious, more advanced than the people around you. But as Carl Jung warned, the greater the ego, the more distant one becomes from the soul. Your awakening is not an accomplishment, it is a remembering. It is not a crown, it is a responsibility. True spiritual wisdom demands that you remain rooted in humility even as you expand beyond old environments, because growth that breeds superiority is not growth. It is inflation disguised as enlightenment. Still, you cannot ignore the feeling of drifting from those who once felt familiar. Conversations that once satisfied you now feel shallow. Cycles you once tolerated now feel heavy. And relationships built on your old identity begin to lose their grip. This is not rejection. It is alignment. You are not pushing people away. Your soul simply refuses to dim itself to fit the rooms it has already outgrown. And when others misunderstand your distance, you must remember that evolution is rarely understood by those who are not yet ready to face their own. Outgrowing someone does not mean they are lesser. It simply means your paths are moving in different directions. As you continue expanding, you will notice that your inner clarity makes certain connections fall away naturally. There is no fight, no argument, no dramatic ending, just quiet separation. And in that separation, you may feel guilt, sadness, or confusion, but none of these feelings are signs that you are wrong. They are signs that you care. They are signs that your heart is changing faster than your environment. And it is in this delicate space that true humility becomes essential. You must hold your growth gently, remembering that not everyone evolves at the same pace, and that spiritual awakening is a deeply personal timeline. Real wisdom is knowing how to rise without looking down on anyone, how to advance without abandoning compassion, how to be free without becoming detached from humanity. Because the true danger of outgrowing others is not the distance created between you and them, It is the distance created between you and your own humility. When growth makes you softer instead of harder, kinder instead of colder, and more conscious instead of more superior, then your evolution becomes real, rooted, and aligned with the soul rather than the ego. This is the essence of spiritual awakening, the quiet expansion that Carl Jung spoke of and Alan Watts understood deeply. Growth that humbles you, opens you, and calls you to walk through the world with greater awareness, not greater pride. 4. Dual existence creates inner tension. Awakened individuals often find themselves living in two worlds at once, and this quiet split creates an inner tension that is far deeper than most people realize. On one side, you move through the familiar landscape of everyday life, work, relationships, responsibilities, expectations, where you are still expected to play the same old roles with the same old consistency. Yet on the other side, a different world is opening within you, a world shaped by spirituality and spiritual awakening, where deeper truths rise to the surface, where your perception sharpens, and where the things you once accepted without question suddenly begin to feel hollow, shallow, or misaligned. This inner world pulls you into a kind of clarity that demands emotional intelligence and self-awareness, forcing you to navigate your life without betraying the emerging version of yourself that sees, feels, and understands life on a more profound level. This dual existence can feel like carrying two identities in a single body: the self that others recognize, and the self that is quietly transforming beneath the surface. As you awaken, you notice that conversations once comfortable now leave you empty. Environments once familiar now drain your energy, and people who used to understand you now seem confused by your silence or depth. You begin to sense the widening gap between the world that operates on habit, noise, and external validation, and the inner world that moves with intuition, truth, and a growing need for authenticity. This is where the tension intensifies, because the mystical world of deep truth does not follow the same logic as the conventional world of daily life. And you start to realize that every step you take toward your inner truth creates distance from what no longer resonates. And yet, this tension is not a mistake. It is an initiation. It pushes you to develop balance, not by shrinking or hiding your growth, but by holding your awakening with steadiness while still participating in the external world with compassion and clarity. It teaches you that the real challenge is not choosing one world over the other, but learning how to move between them without losing yourself. You become more selective with your energy, more deliberate with your choices, more honest with your boundaries, because you understand that protecting your inner world is not selfish. It is necessary for your evolution. The more your consciousness expands, the more you feel the pull between belonging and becoming, between comfort and truth, between who you were and who you are meant to be. This is the tension awakened individuals must learn to navigate: the pressure of carrying deep truth in environments built on surface-level comfort. It requires emotional intelligence to speak gently when you could reveal more, patience to listen when you already understand, and strength to stand firm when others misinterpret your transformation. But as you grow into this balance, you discover that the duality itself becomes your teacher, guiding you to live with depth in a shallow world, to stay awake in places where others are still sleeping, and to honor the world within you without abandoning the world around you. If this message about dual existence and inner tension resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe for more spiritual wisdom that guides you through every stage of your growth. 5. Relationships may deteriorate. As you grow, you will notice that some relationships begin to shift in ways you did not expect. Because the moment you start changing from the inside out, certain connections that once felt comfortable suddenly feel distant, strained, or strangely shallow. You may feel as though the people who used to understand you now look at you with confusion, doubt, or silent judgment. Not because you have done anything wrong, but because your spiritual development disrupts the familiar roles they were used to, and this discomfort makes them retreat, criticize, or try to pull you back into who you used to be. When your inner world begins to expand, your priorities become different, your values become clearer, and your boundaries become stronger. And although this growth is healthy, it can make others feel like they are losing access to the old version of you they depended on. Some people were comfortable only when you were smaller, quieter, more forgiving of behaviors that drained you. And as you begin to honor your own energy, step into deeper spirituality, and make choices aligned with your truth, you naturally create a distance from anyone who was attached to your past identity. What you must understand is that not everyone can meet you at this new level of awareness. And instead of rising with you, some people react with insecurity because your evolution highlights their stagnation. Conversations that once felt natural may now feel empty because you are no longer interested in gossip, chaos, or surface-level talk. Your mind now gravitates toward depth, clarity, and intention, and this creates an invisible separation between you and those who are not ready for that kind of honesty. You might feel guilt for outgrowing people you once loved deeply, but guilt is only a sign that your heart is compassionate, not a signal that you should shrink yourself. Growth does not wait for anyone, and spirituality will always guide you toward alignment, even when your mind wants to hold on to what is familiar. Some people will criticize you for changing because they miss the version of you that made them comfortable, but their reaction says more about their internal limitations than it does about your progress. When your presence no longer matches the unspoken agreements of a relationship, the relationship naturally loosens its grip. And this is not a failure, it is clarity. You are not abandoning anyone. You are simply refusing to betray yourself for the sake of maintaining connections that can no longer survive your expansion. The people who truly value you will adjust, grow, and learn to understand the person you are becoming, while those who cannot adapt will fade from your life effortlessly. This is the quiet cost of spiritual development. Realizing that not everyone who started with you will continue with you, and that outgrowing people is a sign of deep inner evolution, not selfishness. When these shifts happen, let them happen with grace. Remind yourself that your growth is sacred, and accept that some relationships are meant to teach you, not accompany you forever. 6. Hiding your truth leads to fragmentation. Hiding your truth does not just create a small internal conflict. It creates a deep and ongoing fragmentation within you. Because every time you pretend to be someone you are not, you divide yourself into pieces that no longer know how to work together. When you try to fit in on the outside while awakening on the inside, you begin to live a double life that slowly drains your energy, your clarity, and your authenticity. Alan Watts captured this perfectly when he said, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth," reminding you that whenever you shapeshift just to be accepted, you move further away from the self that is real. And even though pretending may offer temporary social comfort, it creates long-term spiritual discomfort because you cannot build a peaceful life on top of a divided inner world. This division intensifies because one part of you is waking up seeking truth, craving freedom, wanting deeper spiritual wisdom, while another part clings desperately to the version of you that others approve. Of Carl Jung warned that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Yet becoming who you truly are is impossible if you keep abandoning yourself in small, subtle ways. Every time you say yes, when your soul means no. Every time you silence your inner voice to protect someone else's comfort. Every time you pretend you don't feel what you feel, you widen the gap between your outer life and your inner reality. At first, the distance seems manageable, but with time, the gap becomes a canyon you can no longer cross without losing yourself. And as this canyon widens, exhaustion shows up, not because you are weak, but because you are carrying the weight of two identities. Pretending demands performance, and performance demands energy, and eventually the cost becomes unbearable. You start to feel disconnected, misplaced, or strangely absent in your own life. And this is the early stage of what Jung called inner disintegration, the slow collapse of psychological harmony when your conscious and unconscious selves are no longer aligned, when the truth inside you grows stronger, but the role you play on the outside stays the same. Pressure builds, tension rises, and something within you starts to break. This is why hiding your truth is never harmless. It delays your transformation, suppresses your awakening, and forces your soul into silence. It was never meant to endure. Yet no soul stays silent forever. The truth always finds a way back to the surface, often through restlessness, irritation, emotional heaviness, or an unexplained longing for something more. These are not weaknesses. They are signals that your deeper self is tired of being hidden. The danger of outgrowing everyone around you is not the loss of relationships. It is the loss of yourself. If you keep shrinking to stay where you no longer belong, when you finally stop hiding, when you allow your awakening to be seen instead of suppressed, you stop fragmenting. Your inner world begins to reunite, and you can finally live with the honesty, integrity, and quiet power your soul has been asking for all along. If this insight on the danger of hiding your truth has helped you see the power of living authentically, let us know. When you're ready to embrace your real self and stop fragmenting your spirit, comment, "I choose truth" below. Your engagement helps us create more spiritual wisdom that speaks directly to your journey. 7. The loneliness is a rite of passage. Loneliness in this stage of your growth is not an accident, but a rite of passage carved into the path of every soul moving toward true spirituality. Because when you begin to outgrow your old patterns, your old roles, and the identities you once used to survive, life naturally leads you into a space where the noise fades and the silence becomes your teacher. Although this silence can feel heavy, it is actually the threshold of spiritual awakening that every awakened individual must walk through. This spiritual loneliness, often described as the dark night of the soul, is not a collapse, but a sacred dismantling, a moment when everything that is false, conditioned, or borrowed begins to fall away. It marks the quiet death of the false self, the part of you shaped by expectations, fear, validation seeking, and old emotional wounds. And even though this inner death feels disorienting, it is the only way the authentic self can be born. You may feel as if you no longer belong in the places where you once felt comfortable, as if the conversations around you no longer nourish you, or as if you are drifting away from people you once loved. Yet this drifting is not abandonment, but transformation, a subtle way the universe rearranges your life, so the next chapter can be built on truth rather than illusion. As this transition deepens, the loneliness you experience is not proof that something is wrong with you, but evidence that something deep within you is awakening your intuition, sharpening, your boundaries strengthening, your tolerance for superficiality thinning, and your desire for meaning expanding. The disorientation you feel is the soul shedding what no longer resonates, much like a snake releasing its old skin. It is uncomfortable, but it is necessary because the new self cannot emerge while clinging to old versions of life. This inner crossing between who you were and who you are becoming feels like standing between two worlds, with the past behind you and the future calling you forward. But the bridge between them can only be crossed in solitude, and although solitude feels harsh, it is in this space that you begin to hear your soul clearly for the first time. The false self thrives in noise, but the true self rises in silence. When you look closely, you will realize that this loneliness is not emptiness, but purification, not loss, but rebirth, and not failure, but the beginning of a profound inner reorganization. Everything you are shedding is making room for the real you to finally breathe. One who lives with deeper clarity, stronger integrity, and a truth that no longer bends to fit the world, but invites the world to meet you as you are. 8. A new tribe will find you. When you start shedding the old shell of who you used to be, you undergo a quiet but powerful transformation that naturally distances you from the environments, conversations, and relationships that no longer match your inner growth. And this shift often feels uncomfortable because it forces you to step into a space where familiarity fades before anything new appears. You may try to hold on to the past, not because it fits you anymore, but because you fear the silence that comes with authentic evolution. Yet the truth is that this silence is the doorway to a higher level of spirituality and spiritual development, guiding you toward people who will one day resonate effortlessly with your new vibration. As Alan Watts expresses so clearly with the simple truth, a new tribe will find you. You are meant to cross this in-between phase where everything feels uncertain, because uncertainty is where the old self dissolves and the new self begins to breathe. Once you begin walking the lonely road of truth, you will quickly notice how the most dangerous thing is not the loneliness itself, but the temptation to return to the version of yourself that keeps others comfortable. And you must resist this temptation even when it feels easier. You may want to explain your decisions, justify your growth, or soften your boundaries to avoid making others uncomfortable. But every time you do that, you betray the very awakening your soul has worked so hard to reach. Growth requires honesty, and honesty sometimes creates distance. You are not meant to stay small just because others prefer you that way, and you are not required to slow your spiritual development to match someone else's pace. The people who are aligned with your past cannot walk with you into a future built on self-respect, clarity, purpose, and authenticity. As you continue to rise inwardly, your energy shifts, your values change, your awareness sharpens, and your priorities reorder themselves. And these inner movements create an outer reality that may first feel like loss, but is actually divine rearrangement. You are being cleared, not abandoned. You are being prepared, not punished. This chapter of solitude is not a void, it is a bridge. You are learning how to exist without needing external validation, how to trust the subtle impulses of your intuition, and how to hear your own voice without being drowned out by the expectations of others. Every time you choose truth over approval, you strengthen the frequency that will eventually attract your new tribe. The people who do not require you to shrink, edit yourself, or perform a version of identity you no longer recognize. They will meet you at the level of your growth, not your wounds. Over time, you begin to understand that loneliness is simply the space between your old alignment and your new one. It is temporary, necessary, and deeply meaningful. It teaches you that you are capable of standing on your own feet, following your inner calling, and honoring your transformation even when no one sees it. And when your new tribe finally arrives, you recognize them immediately, not because they are familiar, but because you feel safe, understood, and seen in a way your previous environments could never offer. They will not fear your light. They will match it. They will not question your growth. They will embody it. And in their presence, you realize why you had to walk alone first, so you could discover the strength, clarity, and self-trust needed to build relationships that honor who you are becoming. To honor your journey of growth and trust in the tribe that is meant to find you, declare it with intention. Comment below, "I welcome my new tribe," to affirm your path and inspire others who are walking the same road. In the end, the true danger of outgrowing everyone around you is not the loneliness. It's forgetting that your growth has purpose. As Alan Watts reminds us, transformation asks you to release what no longer aligns so you can rise into who you were always meant to be. If this message from spiritual wisdom spoke to you today, let it guide your steps forward with clarity and courage. And before you go, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs it, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss any of our upcoming teachings. Your journey continues. Walk it with intention. Most people never make it through awakening. Alan Watts explains the dark test of the soul. The most difficult part of the spiritual journey is not waking up, it's staying awake. Alan Watts once suggested that true awakening feels less like enlightenment and more like a collapse of everything you thought was real. In today's video from Spiritual Wisdom, we're diving into why most people never make it through this awakening and how the dark test of the soul is actually the beginning of your greatest transformation. As you listen, I invite you to reflect on your own journey. Have you ever experienced a moment when the world felt strangely unified, as if the boundaries between you and everything else dissolved? If so, share your experience in the comments below. Your insight may help someone else on their path. 1. The illusion of the separate self is shattered during awakening. Most people move through life tightly attached to a personal storyline. Your name, your memories, your roles, your beliefs. Yet Alan Watts reminds us that this separate self is only a mask, and the true process of spiritual awakening begins the moment that mask starts to crack. You may not notice it at first, but it appears in those strange, sacred moments when the boundaries of you dissolve. When a piece of music absorbs you so completely that the listener disappears. When standing under trees makes you feel as if nature is not around you, but happening through you. Or when washing dishes becomes so effortless that there is no doer. Only the simple movement of water and light. These moments are not accidents. They are small fractures in the illusion, revealing that the separate self you have been defending your entire life is not the fixed identity you believed it was. And this is exactly why awakening feels frightening, because the mind interprets the dissolving of identity as death, even though it is the beginning of clarity. As this illusion starts to fall apart, the mind instinctively panics and clings harder to labels, opinions, routines, and familiar emotional patterns. It tries to rebuild the image of me again and again because it believes survival depends on it. But spiritual awakening is the gentle invitation to see this panic without becoming it, to notice fear as an echo of habit rather than a sign of danger. When you allow the moment to unfold without rushing to rebuild your story, you begin to sense something deeper. That what you truly are is not the identity you perform, but the awareness that silently witnesses everything, every thought, every emotion, every role rising and fading within it. From this space, life changes in subtle but powerful ways. Relationships soften because you no longer argue to protect a fragile image of yourself. Creativity flows more naturally because it no longer needs to impress anyone. Even simple routines feel lighter because you stop pretending there is a separate you, controlling everything, and instead, you participate in life as it unfolds. This is the heart of spirituality and the essence of spiritual awakening. The discovery that separation was a story told by the mind, not the truth of your existence. Still, the mind will resist. It will ask, who am I without my story? What happens if I let go? And the compassionate response is simply to watch these questions arise and dissolve like any other thought. You do not need to answer them. You only need to stay present long enough to see that nothing essential is being lost, only the illusion that kept you small. The dark test of the soul is not a battle to be won, but a series of quiet moments in which you choose presence over panic, awareness over identity, openness over fear. And in those moments, the illusion of the separate self collapses naturally, revealing a deeper, calmer, more honest way of living, one in which softness becomes strength, unity becomes clarity, and life itself becomes the teacher guiding you forward. If you're ready to break free from the illusion of the separate self, comment below, I choose awakening. Let this be your commitment to seeing life with new eyes and stepping boldly into your spiritual transformation. 2. Awakening is a collapse, not a comfort. Awakening is a collapse, not a comfort. And when Alan Watts explored this truth, He revealed that spiritual awakening is not the peaceful rising most people fantasize about, but a profound collapse of everything you believed yourself to be. A shattering of the personal narrative you spent years building. You feel the psychological map of me begin to disintegrate, and as this inner structure falls apart, you step into a raw sense of groundlessness where your mind loses the familiar reference points it once clung to for safety. The ego, terrified of losing control, interprets this as danger, as if something essential within you is dying, and so it urges you to return to old habits, old identities, and old stories, because they offer the illusion of stability. This is why Alan Watts often said that awakening is not about gaining something new, but about watching what is false fall away. Because what collapses is never your true self, but the layers of conditioning that have wrapped around you for years. As this collapse deepens, you feel the tension between who you were taught to be and who you truly are. And this tension becomes the dark test of the soul. Most people turn back at this threshold, not because awakening is impossible, but because the disorientation feels unbearable. They have never been taught that losing the false self is part of genuine spirituality and essential for real spiritual development. You, however, are being invited to stay with the discomfort long enough to see what exists beneath it. When your identity starts dissolving, it can feel like the floor of your life has fallen open. Yet this emptiness is not a void meant to swallow you. It is room for you to expand, to see beyond the rigid personality you used to defend so fiercely. In these moments, you meet the part of yourself that has always watched from the background, the awareness untouched by your past, your roles, your successes, or your traumas. This awareness is not collapsing, it is emerging. As you allow the collapse to unfold, you begin to understand that awakening is less like climbing a ladder and more like shedding a heavy skin. You do not become someone new. You stop pretending to be someone you never were. And even though your mind may resist, insisting that certainty is safer than truth, you slowly recognize that the collapse is not destroying you. It is dissolving your illusions, one by one, until only what is real remains. The fear you feel is simply the ego losing its grip, and the confusion you feel is the old narrative unraveling, making space for a deeper, quieter clarity to rise. This is the moment when spiritual development becomes visible, not as an idea you talk about, but as an inner shift you can feel in your bones. Awakening asks you to surrender the comfort of your old identity and trust the unknown that opens inside you. It asks you to let the collapse happen without running from it, without distracting yourself, without trying to rebuild your old life. Because when the collapse finishes, you realize that nothing essential was lost. Only the walls around your true self crumbled. The me you thought you were dissolves, and the awareness you truly are steps forward, steady, spacious, and unafraid. And as Alan Watts said, you do not transform yourself, you simply get out of your own way, reminding you that awakening is not about effort, it is about allowing. If this message resonates with your awakening journey, comment below. I choose inner truth over comfort. 3. Spiritual ego is the most seductive trap. The most deceptive obstacle on the path of awakening is the rise of the spiritual ego. And you need to understand this clearly because it appears precisely at the moment when you believe you've escaped ego altogether. After your old identity collapses and the beliefs that once defined you begin to crumble, the mind instinctively searches for a new story to attach itself to. And often, it chooses the most seductive story of all: the identity of being spiritual, being awakened, being a seeker of truth. You begin to think of yourself not as the person you once were, but as the meditator, the mystic, the enlightened one. And although these labels look pure, they are still labels, still masks, still roles you perform for yourself. Alan Watts warned that the biggest ego trip is getting rid of the ego. And when Carl Jung said, "Beware of unearned wisdom," he was pointing to the same danger. The mind can turn even your spiritual progress into another badge of superiority. This is why spiritual materialism is so seductive. You start collecting mystical experiences the way others collect status symbols, admiring your own insight, your calmness, your intuition, your connection to the universe, and instead of dissolving ego, you secretly strengthen it. You meditate not for inner freedom, but for spiritual identity. You chase synchronicities, not to listen, but to be validated. You talk about energy, awakening, or signs not to share truth, but to feel like you belong to a higher world. Yet all of this is still ego dressed in sacred clothing. As this illusion deepens, you drift from genuine awakening and move into a performance of spirituality. You try to look awakened, sound awakened, behave awakened, but the more you perform it, the further you drift from the truth. The spiritual ego wants to feel chosen, elevated, special, and it whispers, "You are different from them," creating a subtle divide between you and the world, even as you believe you are transcending separation. This is why the trap is so dangerous. It feels righteous, noble, and enlightened. But true spiritual wisdom strips away not only your old identity, but also the spiritual identity you build to replace it. Because authentic awakening has no interest in titles, roles, or being spiritual. Real awakening is quiet, humble, soft, and deeply human. It makes you more grounded, not more special. More compassionate, not more superior. More aware, not more inflated. And the deeper you go, the more you realize that awakening is not something you wear like a robe. It is something you live through sincerity, honesty, and a willingness to see your own shadow without hiding behind sacred language or mystical airs. When you begin to see this clearly, you understand what both Alan Watts and Carl Jung were trying to tell you. That ego can survive even its own death, that it can disguise itself as light, and that the real test of the soul is not whether you look spiritual, but whether you can release every identity, good, bad, sacred, or ordinary, and stand in the truth without needing to be anything at all. Only then does awakening begin to reveal itself, not as a title or a personality, but as a quiet unfolding of freedom, presence, and reality as it is, without performance, without pretense, and without the seductive mask of the spiritual ego. 4. Teachers and gurus can become new attachments. Teachers and gurus often appear as lights on the path, yet that light becomes dangerous the moment you turn it into a substitute for your own seeing, because the subtle trap of spirituality is not in following a teacher, but in believing that someone else can finish the journey for you. You may admire a guru's clarity, their confidence, or the way their presence calms the room. And at first, this admiration feels innocent. But slowly, quietly, it can grow into dependency. And dependency becomes the very chain that prevents spiritual awakening. Not because the teacher intends to mislead you, but because your mind begins to whisper that awakening is something they possess and you must earn. The moment you believe that truth lives in someone else more than it lives in you, you reinforce the separation between seeker and sage, between the one who is lacking and the one who is complete. And this separation is exactly what awakening dissolves. So the trap is subtle and psychological, not dramatic or obvious. You may hear a teacher say, "Look inward." Yet instead of looking, you wait for them to give you confirmation that you've looked correctly. You may hear them say, "The answer is in your awareness." Yet you keep returning to their words to feel safe. And in this cycle, you replace your own inner authority with their voice, which Alan Watts warns becomes a new form of imprisonment disguised as devotion. This is why the path of spirituality demands honesty, not the performance of being humble before a teacher, but the courage to observe your own mind in real time, the longing to be led, the fear of being wrong, the desire to be chosen by someone who seems wiser. These tendencies are not failures. They are invitations to see the ego's hunger for reassurance. A teacher can illuminate these blind spots, but no teacher can cross the threshold for you, because awakening is not passed from hand to hand like a relic. It is recognized directly in your own awareness. Every genuine teacher, from ancient mystics to modern psychologists like Carl Jung, ultimately points you back to yourself. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And this truth means that no spiritual guide, no matter how enlightened, can replace the work of looking. When you idealize a guru, you create a hierarchy that keeps you small. And this hierarchy becomes a veil over your own perception. When you fear disappointing a teacher, you silence the very intuition awakening is trying to strengthen. When you imitate their tone, their manner, their metaphors, you drift further from the raw, honest seeing that spiritual awakening requires. The danger is not the teacher. The danger is forgetting that the teacher is only a finger pointing to the moon. And if you stare at the finger too long, you never see the sky. A real teacher becomes a mirror, not a master. They reflect your potential rather than claiming ownership over your progress. They help you see your patterns, but they never ask to replace your discernment. They guide your questions, but they never demand that you surrender your inner compass. If someone's authority makes you shrink, step back. If someone's wisdom makes you doubt your own lived experience, breathe and return to your center. And if your spiritual practice becomes more about pleasing a guru than meeting yourself honestly, you have traded one identity for another, the identity of a seeker who forever believes the summit is somewhere outside themselves. The heartbeat of awakening is direct recognition, noticing awareness as it is, unborrowed, unmediated, free. A teacher can clear the dust from the window, but they cannot give you the sky. They can describe stillness, but they cannot silence your mind for you. They can speak truth, but they cannot hand you seeing. The moment you understand this, spirituality stops being performance and becomes presence. And the authority you once placed in another returns quietly to your own breath, your own perception, your own inner life, the only place real awakening has ever lived. If this message has opened your eyes to a deeper truth, leave your like and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. Turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our spiritual insights. Comment below. I am free from all attachments, to affirm your growth and alignment on this awakening journey. 5. Chasing spiritual experiences distracts from truth. Mystical experiences can feel like the brightest moments on your path of spirituality because visions, bursts of cosmic consciousness, and waves of bliss make you believe that something extraordinary is finally happening to you. They are seductive precisely because they lift you above your ordinary life and give you a taste of something larger, something divine, something that feels like a secret doorway into the universe. Yet as powerful as these moments are, they rise and fall like waves on the ocean, brilliant, dramatic, unforgettable, but never permanent. And this is where many people unknowingly step into the trap that Alan Watts warned about. Because when these highs fade, the mind instantly begins searching for the next one, convinced that spiritual development must mean collecting more highs, deeper visions, and stronger sensations. The truth is that this constant chasing pulls you away from the very awakening you are hoping to reach. You become attached to the waves instead of learning to rest in the ocean beneath them. When I speak directly to you, I want you to see how subtle this trap is, because it disguises itself as progress. You tell yourself you are growing because you felt something intense. You tell yourself you are awakening because you saw something unusual. But when the high disappears, as it always does, you feel lost again, and you start believing that you must chase another experience to stay on the path. This is what many teachers call spiritual materialism, where inner states become spiritual trophies and mystical moments become something you try to possess rather than understand. What most people never realize is that true awakening is not a moment of intensity at all. It is the quiet, steady, ever-present awareness that exists underneath every moment when you are joyful, when you are afraid, when you are confused, and when you are simply washing dishes or walking outside under an ordinary sky. This awareness is always here, always unmoving, always watching, always holding every experience that comes and goes. It is the ocean itself, not the waves that briefly rise upon it. And because people are so addicted to the waves, they overlook the stillness that never leaves. The mind loves drama, proof, excitement, emotional fireworks, anything that feels special enough to confirm you are making progress. But spirituality matures when you stop needing proof and start realizing that truth does not need to shout. Awakening is not loud. It is not sudden. It is not a cosmic fireworks show. It is a quiet seeing, a grounded clarity, an inner steadiness that remains even when nothing extraordinary is happening. When you can rest in that awareness, when you can sit in silence without waiting for a vision or a sign, that is when real spiritual development begins to unfold. You stop chasing the extraordinary and start noticing the sacred in the ordinary. You stop measuring your worth by how intense your experiences are and begin recognizing the deeper transformation happening beneath the surface. And in that shift, you finally understand that you were never meant to collect waves. You were meant to sink into the vast, calm, unshakable ocean that has been holding you all along. 6. The dark night of the soul is unavoidable. Every authentic awakening leads you into the dark night of the soul, a place where everything you once relied on begins to fall apart. It feels as if life is deliberately pulling the ground from beneath your feet. your spiritual practices stop working. Your beliefs lose their meaning. And even the presence of God seems to vanish. You start to question yourself. Why is this happening when I have done everything right? But the truth is, this collapse is not punishment. It is purification. The dark night burns away the illusions of control and the layers of spiritual pride that keep you attached to the idea of being enlightened. As Alan Watts once said, you are the universe experiencing itself. And to realize that truth, you must first lose every concept that separates you from it. This phase can feel terrifying because the mind no longer finds comfort in its usual certainties. You can no longer rely on spiritual highs or external validation. The prayers that once brought peace may now bring silence. The rituals that once grounded you now feel hollow. Yet this emptiness is not meaningless. It is sacred space where the false self dies so that the true self can awaken. Carl Jung called this descent a necessary stage in individuation, reminding us that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. When you fall into this darkness, the ego resists with all its strength, telling you to run toward new teachers, new philosophies, or new paths. But every escape only delays the transformation. The darkness you avoid today will return tomorrow until you dare to face it fully. When you stop running and allow yourself to sit within the unknown, something profound begins to unfold. The despair softens into stillness. The silence reveals wisdom. What once felt like abandonment now feels like invitation, a call from your soul to surrender every belief that kept you separate from life itself. In that surrender, you discover that God was never absent. Only your image of God was. You realize that awakening is not about reaching light, but about embracing both light and shadow with equal reverence. The dark night of the soul, then, is not a mistake in your spiritual journey. It is the journey. It dismantles every illusion until nothing false remains, leaving only what is pure, whole, and eternal within you. Through this passage, spiritual wisdom deepens not as theory, but as lived truth. And when you finally emerge, you do so not as someone who has found, but as someone who has become one with the divine pulse that has always been within. If this message resonates with you, comment below. I'm facing the dark night with courage. Your voice helps us understand you better and create deeper content for your journey. 7. The end of seeking is the beginning of true freedom. The end of seeking is often misunderstood because the mind believes spirituality and spiritual awakening must be earned through effort, discipline, or extraordinary experiences. Yet the deeper truth is far simpler and far more confronting. There is no path to awakening because the one who is walking the path is the same consciousness they are searching for. The moment you begin to see this, you notice that the seeker and the sought have never been two separate forces. They are a single movement of awareness looking at itself through different masks. This is why so many teachers repeat the same paradoxical truth. What you are seeking is already here. And the journey is not about becoming something greater, but about dissolving every false layer that convinces you that you are anything less than the ground of being itself. The ego resists this because it thrives on becoming better, becoming wiser, becoming awakened. But awakening is not an accomplishment. It is the quiet falling away of the illusion that there is someone inside you who needs to reach a higher state. As this illusion dissolves, you start recognizing that the identity you once protected so fiercely was nothing more than a temporary shape formed by memory, fear, habit, and conditioning. When that shape begins to soften, what remains is not a new or improved version of you, but the open, clear presence that has always been watching your life unfold from behind the scenes. This presence is not personal. It does not have preferences, judgments, or attachments, and it does not chase enlightenment or resist suffering. It simply is. And when you begin to rest as that presence even for a moment, you experience what many call true freedom, because the pressure to become fades, and the longing to find something outside yourself loses its grip. You realize that awareness has always been here, quietly holding every moment of your life, and nothing you could seek would bring you closer to yourself. From this clarity, even the most ordinary parts of life become sacred. When you wash your hands, you feel the water without a thinker behind the sensation. When you walk, there is only the movement of walking without the story of the walker. When you breathe, there is simply breath, not your breath, but breath happening in the vast field of awareness. This is the essence of spiritual awakening, returning to ordinary life with extraordinary clarity, seeing that the divine is not hidden in distant visions, but woven into the simplest moments you used to overlook. You begin to understand why mystics say enlightenment is not about escaping the world, but seeing it as it truly is, without distortion. As even the identity of the awakened one dissolves, something deeper reveals itself. The recognition that consciousness is not inside you. You are inside consciousness. You are a temporary expression of something timeless, appearing for a while as a human life. And when this becomes clear, the game of becoming ends. What survives is not the personality you once identified with, but the spacious awareness that shines through it. In that recognition, life stops being a search and becomes a simple, peaceful unfolding, where presence sees itself through every experience, every breath, every step, and realizes it was never divided to begin with. In the end, the dark test of awakening is not meant to break you. It is meant to reveal you. As Alan Watts teaches, awakening strips away the illusion of separation so you can finally meet the truth of who you are. If today's message from Spiritual Wisdom has helped you see your own journey more clearly, let it be a reminder that every moment of confusion, fear, or surrender is guiding you toward deeper awareness and inner freedom. If this spoke to your soul, please like this video, share it with someone who needs it, subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom, and turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming teachings. Your awakening matters, and you don't have to walk this path alone.